I have been a priest for more than 30 years, and I have never doubted my vocation. I have never had uncertainties about the calling I felt when I was young. My life has always been dedicated to the church, to the sacraments, and to the community of believers. However, that morning, there was something unusual. An unusual weight pressed on my chest, a discomfort I couldn't explain. I prayed more intensely than usual, as if my soul sensed what my mind had yet to realize. I implored God for the church, for the priests, and for Pope Francis. My prayer was filled with urgency, as if something momentous were about to happen. During the Mass, everything seemed normal, but at the moment of consecration, I felt a crushing pain in my chest. My body staggered, I struggled to breathe, and before I could ask for help, the world around me faded to black. I could hear distant voices, people rushing, and someone calling my name, but I was no longer there. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer on the church floor. I was observing myself from above. My body lay motionless before the altar, while parishioners and rescuers desperately tried to bring me back to life. Yet, I felt no fear. In fact, an indescribable peace enveloped me. It was as if all the worries, pains, and burdens I had carried throughout my life had simply melted away. I floated above that scene, light, free of pain and anguish. But before I could grasp what was happening, I was drawn upward, as if an invisible force was pulling me into another dimension. The walls of the church faded away, the human sounds became a distant echo, and then I was immersed in a light, but not just any light. It was alive, filled with an absolute love that I can only describe that way. And in that moment, I understood that I was not alone. Before me, emerging from that living light, was someone I recognized, even though I had never seen him before. Jesus. It was not a vision or a vague apparition. It was him, real and tangible. Concrete in a way that nothing I had ever touched or seen in my life. His eyes, how can I describe them? They were not merely deep, but an ocean of infinite understanding, where every thought of mine became transparent, every mystery of my soul unveiled without the need for words. At that moment, I realized that he knew every aspect of me, every sincere prayer, every repressed doubt, every moment when my faith wavered, every act of love, and even every mistake I had hidden from myself. The most inexplicable part was that he looked at me with a love free of judgment, a love that allowed no masks. In that gaze, I understood what it meant to be completely known and yet unconditionally loved. I tried to speak, but there was no need. Even before a word could leave my lips, his voice resonated within me and around me as well. It was not just a sound, it was the truth. It is not yet your time. These words resonated within my essence, filled with undeniable conviction. However, there was more. Jesus was not just sending me back, but wanted me to see something that would transform my life forever. In an instant, the light around us intensified, and the landscape before me began to change. We were no longer there. I was catapulted into a vision that made me realize that the church, the institution I had served my whole life, was so much more than I had ever imagined. Suddenly, I was no longer facing Jesus in the light. The surrounding space expanded and reshaped itself. I saw the church, but not as a building of stone and bricks. It was something greater, something alive, like a network of spiritual energy radiating into the world. Some churches appeared as beacons emitting a bright light, pulsing with the power of true faith, but to my great sorrow, I noticed that many were dark, or had a dim, flickering light, almost on the verge of extinguishing. I understood without anyone telling me that this represented the faith of the people within. Where there was a genuine prayer and true devotion, the light shone brightly. On the other hand, where faith had been replaced by empty practices, conformity, and the pursuit of status, the light dimmed. And then I saw something that tightened my heart. Some churches appeared completely extinguished, shrouded in thick shadows that seemed to suffocate any sign of vitality. The pain in my chest was immediate. I wanted to scream, to do something, but I felt powerless in the face of that vision. I had always believed that the greatest threats to the church came from outside: hostile governments, anti-Christian ideologies, persecutions. However, in light of that revelation, I understood that the real danger was internal. What weakens the church were not external aggressions, but the silent erosion of faith, indifference, and the distortion of truth. My gaze returned to Jesus, and I noticed the sadness on his face. His voice, filled with immense sorrow, pierced my soul. "My church has forgotten me." These words hit me like a punch. How could it be that the church, meant to reflect Christ on earth, could forget him? I wanted to ask, I wanted to understand, but before I could react, the vision changed again. The scenery around me faded once more, and in an instant I found myself in a different place, recognizing it immediately. It was the Vatican, but not as the rest of the world perceives it. Before me, I saw Pope Francis sitting in his apartment alone. His head was bowed, his hands joined in prayer. But I sensed something beyond the visible. He was trembling slightly, not just from his age or fatigue, but from an invisible weight that seemed to crush him. Then I saw the shadows. They were not human figures. They had no faces, but they were present like invisible pressures, forces whispering around him. They were not demons in the traditional sense, but influences, voices trying to bend him, to divert him. The Pope bore the weight of the whole church on his shoulders, and at the same time, he struggled against forces trying to lead him in opposite directions. My heart ached to see him surrounded by pressures, pushing him to choose between being faithful to the truth or yielding to what the world demanded. Jesus stood by my side silently, and I didn't need to ask questions, as the answer came even before I could formulate the question. His voice, filled with undeniable authority, broke the silence. "The weight of the church is great. Many of my shepherds are fighting. Some remain faithful, while others have been deceived." In hearing this, I understood something I had never noticed before. The struggle represented not only a clash between the church and the world, but also unfolded within the church itself. There were those who still carried the flame of true faith, who refused to compromise the truth, but there were also those who had lost their way, more concerned with power, influence, and acceptance than with the will of God. I observed cardinals, bishops, and priests, some enveloped in light, others immersed in shadows, their intentions clouded. "Pray for him, pray for my church." Jesus' command was not a request, but an urgent appeal. The vision shifted again. I found myself in a grand solemn hall where bishops, cardinals, and ecclesiastical leaders had gathered. The air was thick with tension, and I understood that this was not a mere meeting, but a battle of ideas. Before me, some fervently expressed the need to adapt the church to modern times, arguing that without changes, we would lose believers and relevance. Others, with firm voices, asserted that God's truth could not be shaped by the world's demands, for the church exists not to please but to guide souls towards salvation. With every word spoken, I sensed what lay behind them. Some were driven by a genuine desire to evangelize, while others carried a heavy weight. I saw several leaders who seemed motivated by a force not divine, an ambition masked as zeal, a desire for power disguised as talk of progress. Not everyone there spoke in the name of God. Jesus remained by my side, and I felt his sadness. The enemy sows doubt among my shepherds, diverting their attention from my voice. His words pierced my soul. I understood that this battle was not merely human, but spiritual. It was not just a confrontation between conservatives and progressives within the church, but something much deeper. The enemy did not attack with overt violence, but with confusion. He did not need to destroy the church with physical persecutions if he could weaken it from within, diluting the truth until it was left with only an empty shell. The most dangerous heresy was not the open denial of God, but the subtle distortion of His word, to the point where the shepherds themselves got lost in what they believed to be goodness. I turned my gaze to Jesus, and for the first time, I felt a real fear. "Will the church stand?" I asked inwardly, without moving my lips. Jesus didn't respond immediately, but looked straight ahead, and the vision around us began to change. I was projected into a new scene, and this time the vision was so incredible that my mind struggled to comprehend it. Before me unfolded a colossal battle, but it wasn't a war like those on earth, with swords and spears. What I was witnessing was a conflict between forces that seemed unbound by time and matter. On one side, blazing angels, whose presence radiated such an intensity of holiness that it was almost unbearable to look them in the eye. On the other, formless shadows, entities devoid of defined contours, yet filled with absolute evil, whispering words like cold, treacherous winds, spreading doubt, fear, and pride. The angels, in contrast, did not shout or rage. They shone, radiating truth, and stood unwavering amidst that war. What was invisible was not the Vatican or the buildings, but the faith of the believers, tested every moment. Thus we understood that this battle was not merely theoretical or symbolic. It was fought around every soul, desiring to remain anchored to the truth every day. And then I saw something that took my breath away. Between the shadows and the angels, small groups of people were kneeling in prayer. They were simple believers, many of whom were unknown to the world, some in modest homes, others in almost deserted churches. But their prayers ascended like burning flames, dissipating the darkness. For every sincere word, for every supplication, something invisible was breaking. The shadows writhed and retreated in a way so vivid that I could never forget it. The only truly effective weapon in this war was not power, nor debates, nor human strategies. It was prayer. When a heart bowed in repentance and true faith, when a soul called upon God without ulterior motives, it generated a real impact in the spiritual realm. The church will stand, but only if my people dedicate themselves to prayer. The voice of Jesus conveyed this truth clearly. Prayer was not optional. It was the thin line that separates light from darkness. The vision changed again, and this time I was led to a place that seemed beyond time. Before me, two roads opened up. The church shone with light. I saw the faithful turning to Christ with a fervor I had never seen before. The temples were full, not out of mere habit, but because people sought God. The sacraments were received with great respect, prayer was genuine, and the priests preached with courage and truth. It was a revival, a renewed intensity that touched nations. Where there had once been empty temples, now there were vibrant communities of faith. Demons were retreating and shadows were fading. I felt hope, a joy so intense it almost made me cry. "This is a possible future," Jesus said, but before I could grasp that vision, the scene changed. In the second path, the church was just a memory. The temples appeared empty, abandoned, or turned into profane places. The faithful had scattered, disillusioned, as those who should have guided them had pushed away the truth in search of acceptance. I saw hesitant priests, reluctant to preach with authority, fearful of offending. I observed a lukewarm faith, diluted and irrelevant, and the most distressing aspect was that the world didn't even notice the church's absence. It had not been destroyed by external persecutions, but by its own omission, by the choice to please rather than transform. My chest tightened. Which road will the church choose? The voice of Jesus resounded, not as a statement, but as a true question, weighed down by an inescapable burden. I understood that the future was not predetermined. The choice lay in the hands of the faithful, each one deciding to pray, to stand firm, and not to yield to the spirit of the world. Before I could ask for more, before I could plead to stay and understand fully, I sensed something pulling me away with irresistible force. It was not violent, but definitive. The world around me began to fade, as if I were being sucked back to my point of origin. I looked at Jesus one last time, and his gaze conveyed that mix of love and sadness, as if he was aware of how much this would mark me. I tried to speak, but there was no time. My spiritual body was filled with a dizzying sensation, as if I were both falling and ascending at the same time. The light dissolved, the visions extinguished, and suddenly there was darkness, but it was not the same peaceful emptiness as before. It was a transition. I was returning. I jolted awake, gasping like a man surfacing from the depths of the ocean. My lungs were on fire, my heart racing wildly. I had returned to the physical world, the bright lights of the hospital surrounding me. For a moment I was frozen in place. Excited voices echoed around me, doctors, nurses, and astonished, shocked faces. But I didn't feel like I belonged in that moment. My body was there, but my soul was still reeling from what I had just experienced. Everything felt lifeless, colorless, weightless compared to what I had gone through. My eyes scanned the room, searching for signs of light, proof that this hadn't all been a dream. But the only sound I managed to produce was a whisper, hoarse and weak, yet filled with a burning urgency. I had to tell. In the days that followed, as my body healed, my mind struggled to comprehend what I had lived through. I knew it wasn't a delusion or a dream. What I had witnessed was more real than any experience I had ever had on Earth. But now the real challenge was beginning. How to describe all of this to others? How to share something so vast and urgent without being labeled as insane or delirious? I realized my mission had changed. It was no longer just about celebrating Mass, administering sacraments, or teaching doctrine. I had to warn people, help them understand the spiritual battle happening all around us, the danger looming over the church, and Christ's call to authentic prayer. But how could I talk about something that many didn't even believe existed? I began to share my experience, starting with those closest to me. Some listened with wide eyes, feeling the weight of my words. I saw tears in the eyes of simple believers and a mix of fear and hope in the gazes of other priests who still held on to the flame of faith. But there was also skepticism. I heard whispers suggesting I was simply confused after the trauma of clinical death. Some tried to rationalize my experience, claiming that an oxygen-deprived brain could generate vivid hallucinations. Others looked at me with considered a crazy opinion. Deep down, I knew the truth, and I recalled the words of Jesus, "You are not burdened by the beliefs of others. You are only meant to tell the truth." This gave me motivation. It didn't matter how many ignored my voice, I could not remain silent. As time passed, something unexpected began to happen. People who had initially gazed at me with suspicion started to reach out to me in secret. Devout individuals who had distanced themselves from the church began to return, not out of habit, but because they felt something inside them awakening with my words. Some priests who were initially skeptical started to pay me more attention, realizing that what I presented reflected feelings they too shared but didn't know how to express. A haunting awareness that something was wrong, that faith was being corrupted from within. They then began to share their stories. Once crowded churches now empty, young people who no longer saw the meaning of faith, priests afraid to speak the truth for fear of offending the world. Each account confirmed what Jesus had revealed to me. The battle was already underway. It was then that I understood a fundamental concept. My mission was not to convince non-believers, nor to fight to prove something to those who mocked or rationalized faith. My job was to support those who wished to remain strong, but felt the weight of loneliness and doubt. I had to remind them that the church could still stand firm, that the light continued to shine, albeit faintly in some corners. It didn't matter how dark the world became. Where there was true prayer, where there were souls ready to fight, the church remained standing. And in that moment, I realized I was not alone. No matter how much the shadows tried to suffocate faith, no matter how many lies the enemy spread, there were still those who resisted. And as long as there was even one burning heart, the war would not be lost to the truth. But just as some people began to grasp the urgency of the message, resistances also arose. Regrettably, those did not come only from the outside, but also from within the church itself. Some superiors began reaching out to me for private conversations, warning me about what I was saying and urging me to avoid causing alarm. A bishop, with a strained smile, told me that my experience was interesting, but it would be better to keep everything personal. People might misunderstand. "Father, we don't want panic or confusion," he added, but I understood what it meant. They wanted me to be silent, not because they doubted me, but because they feared the consequences that truth could provoke. The church was already under pressure from all sides, and a priest talking about spiritual battles, shadows within the Vatican, and a potential collapse of faith was uncomfortable. At that moment, I found myself in a dilemma. I could follow their advice, keep the experience private, and continue my pastoral routine without drawing attention. I could sidestep conflicts, maintain my position without risking retaliation. But then I recalled the eyes of Jesus and the sadness in his voice when he said, "My church has forgotten me." In that moment, I realized I could not remain silent. I could not place my personal safety ahead of the truth that had been revealed to me. I knew I might lose support, face discredit, and even be cast out, but if Jesus showed me all this, it was because he wanted me to speak. He hadn't asked me to seek acceptance, but to remain faithful. I took a deep breath and made my decision. No matter the cost, I would continue to speak. I began to share my testimony more openly, not just during private discussions, but also in homilies and gatherings with the faithful, during spiritual retreats. I spoke about the urgent need for true prayer, a return to authentic faith, that invisible battle that was eroding the church from within. Some listened with tearful eyes, feeling that what I was saying echoed their own sentiments, while others remained silent, restless, and uncomfortable. But what struck me most was the division my message was causing, not between believers and non-believers, but within the same ecclesial community. There were those who recognized the truth in what I was saying and joined me in prayer, but there were also those who looked at me with growing skepticism. "Father, you're exaggerating," some of my fellow priests would say. "This is all too dramatic. There have always been difficulties in the church." In their faces, I read a mix of disbelief and fear, the fear of accepting that the spiritual crisis was deeper than they wanted to admit. Then the whispers began, small but persistent comments among the clergy, sidelong glances when I entered a room. Documents that were once readily available started to become scarce, and invitations to important diocesan events, which used to come frequently, began to dwindle. I wasn't facing a direct attack, but I felt pushed into the shadows, isolated. At first, I felt indignation. I was simply sharing what Christ had revealed to me. But then I understood that this too was part of the battle. The truth has always been unsettling, always met with resistance. The enemy didn't need cruel persecutions when it could use fear and conformity to silence those who dared to speak. It was at that moment that my second decision took shape. If I could no longer communicate within the bounds of the traditional structure, I would find alternative ways to express my message. If they tried to silence me from the pulpits, I would seek other avenues to carry it forward. If I could no longer speak freely within the ecclesiastical hierarchy, I would begin to express myself beyond it as well. I started drafting accounts of my experiences, first in short writings for prayer groups, then in open letters for those who wanted to listen. Little by little, my narrative began to spread. Some transcribed my words, others shared them on social media. Before long, I was receiving messages from faithful from all over the world, people who sensed that something was amiss, who felt their faith fading without realizing it, who sensed a void within the church without knowing why. They sought my advice, looked for help. Some simply thanked me, saying, "Thank you, Father, now I know I'm not crazy." This filled me with strength. I realized that my mission was not to convert non-believers, but to reignite the faith in those who still wanted to believe. However, alongside those who welcomed my message, there were also those who vehemently rejected it. Not everyone attacked me directly, but the signs were clear. Offensive insults, accusations of fanaticism, colleagues avoiding me, bishops labeling me as an alarmist. Some claimed that my experiences were purely imaginary and that I was sowing unfounded fears, while others accused me of dividing the church and fueling extremism. What frightened me the most, however, were those who tried to distort my message, taking parts of what I said and manipulating them to insinuate that I had revolutionary intentions and wanted to challenge ecclesiastical authority. I knew this was not the case. I had never aspired to be a revolutionary. My only desire was for the church to return to Christ, but I began to understand that for many, this idea was seen as too dangerous. So I realized something that broke my heart. It wasn't just spiritual forces trying to silence the truth, but also people within the church feared what that truth might imply for them. As an uncomfortable figure, I was no longer just despised by some. There was a clear attempt to render me irrelevant. The doors that were once open began to close, and loneliness became my most frequent companion. Many of those who once walked beside me now tried to avoid my presence. Even some who had trusted me began to keep their distance, fearing being associated with someone deemed problematic. The weight of this situation started to bear down on me. I was aware that I was acting rightly, but being rejected by the church, an institution I had dedicated my life to, was a burden I never thought I would have to bear. I spent nights in prayer, asking God why He had put me in this situation, if in the end no one wanted to listen to me. I questioned whether I should continue or if it would be better to withdraw, accepting that perhaps I had been mistaken, that I was just an old man insisting on something that others did not want. Then, the look on Jesus' face and the sadness in His voice when He said, "My church has forgotten me," came back to me. I remembered the spiritual battle I had witnessed, the shadows trying to swallow faith, and the small prayer groups keeping the light alive. It became clear to me that even in the midst of darkness, there were still those who stood firm. I realized that my suffering was nothing compared to the pain Jesus felt, seeing His church turn away from Him. I could not give up, not because I was strong, but because this struggle was not just about me. I wasn't defending my reputation or my position. I was trying to fulfill the calling that had been entrusted to me. So that night, I prayed one last time, "Lord, don't let me falter. If you want to speak to me, I will speak. If you want me to be ignored, I will accept it. Just give me the strength not to betray what I have seen." And it was then that, as I began to accept the idea of walking alone, I found those few who were quietly fighting the same battle. They were not many. A few priests, some religious brothers, and simple, faithful families, ordinary people without much influence, but filled with a genuine love for Christ, represented those who had experienced what I had, a profound restlessness and a calling to stand firm even when everything around seemed to be falling apart. Some of them discreetly sought me out, some out of fear of being seen by my side, others without worrying about the consequences. "Father, we know what you are supporting is true," they told me. "We can sense it too, but we don't know how to proceed." Their words revitalized me. They did not seek to spark a revolution or divide the church. They simply wanted to maintain their fidelity to Christ as he truly is, without a sugar-coated version to please the world. In that small group, I felt a renewed hope within me. I had let the fear of isolation and rejection consume me, but in front of those people, realizing that I was not alone was liberating. The true church was not made up of positions, titles, or grand structures, but resided in the hearts of those who sincerely sought God. It was there, among the simple, that I realized the light continued to shine, even if faintly. I had no idea what might happen next. I didn't know if my message would resonate or whether others would awaken. But one thing was certain: as long as there was at least one group of faithful ready to fight with prayer and truth, the church would still have a chance to hope. In a way, I felt that this was exactly what Jesus had wanted to reveal to me from the very start. Over time, I came to understand that my mission wasn't to change the entire church all at once. That was not my task. I was not called to fight against institutions or structures, nor to challenge ecclesiastical authority. My calling was different: to strengthen those who still held on to the faith, to rekindle the flame in those who sensed that something was wrong, but didn't know how to express it. It was essential to remind people that prayer should not be seen merely as an ancient custom, but as a real weapon, the only one capable of resisting the darkness that sought to penetrate the church. I no longer needed acceptance. I didn't expect everyone to trust me. I just needed to know that there were people capable of understanding and recognizing what was happening, ready to stand firm. Thus, I began to notice a silent but authentic movement, small groups of believers returning to prayer, young people who, instead of abandoning their faith, were starting to rediscover its beauty, priests who, despite the pressure, chose to speak the truth without fear. However, I was aware that the struggle was far from over. What I had seen during my near-death experience was not just a warning, but a constant wake-up call. The church was facing a crucial choice, and that choice had yet to be made. Every day, from the heights of the Vatican down to the neglected small parishes, that decision was being made: to follow Christ for who he is, or to modify him to fit the world. Jesus showed me two possible futures, and I knew the battle continued. The church would not collapse all at once, nor would it be annihilated by a single catastrophic event. Its fall would occur through the slow and silent erosion of faith, through adaptation to darkness in the name of acceptance. But as long as there were those who prayed, those who resisted, those who clung to the truth, hope remained. And that hope was all I needed to keep going. After that experience, my prayer life underwent a radical transformation. I used to pray out of duty, out of habit, because I felt it was an obligation as a priest. Now I prayed because I understood that without prayer, the church could not survive. It was not just a spiritual activity, but an urgent necessity. It was as if I could sense and almost grasp the invisible reality moving around us. Every sincere prayer was a blow against the darkness, and every act of true faith reignited a small light in the world. On the other hand, every concession and every time someone chose the easier path instead of the truth, the shadows took hold. The war was not fought with swords or words, but with the daily choice between light and darkness. It was as simple as it was terrifying. I realized then that prayer was the only true weapon we had, and without it, we were vulnerable. Yet despite all the darkness I perceived, there was still hope. The church could be saved not through grand speeches, political reforms, or structural overhauls, but through the hearts that decided to remain faithful, even when everything around seemed to be falling apart. Faith could not be sustained by fear or empty traditions, but by authentic love for God, a love that still existed. I saw it in the eyes of those who sought my help, in those who cried while listening to my story, because they felt deep down that something was wrong, but didn't know how to explain it. What Jesus showed me was a warning, not an illusion. The decision rested in the hands of the believers. The church could be reborn or fade into oblivion, and that choice, ultimately, was not collective but individual. Every person who knelt to pray made a difference. Each of us held a piece of the church's future. Over time, I realized that my message was not meant for everyone. Some preferred to believe that everything was fine, that the church had always faced crises, and that this was just another phase. Others rejected any idea of evil because accepting it would mean having to change, to take a stand. But I also found those who understood, deeply sensitive people, aware that faith was waning, that the church was in danger. For them, my words were not new, but a confirmation of what God had already poured into their hearts, and it was for them that I continued to speak. It didn't matter how many mocked or ignored me. I didn't need everyone to believe. I just needed those who still had ears to listen and respond to Christ's call. Yet time was running short, and this was the feeling that never left me since my return. I can't say how much time this life has left, but I know I will use every day available to me to accomplish what Jesus has asked of me. I'm not special. I'm not holier or more worthy than anyone else. I'm just a priest who died for a few moments and returned with a weight in my heart, the weight of a truth that cannot be ignored. Outside of political attacks and anti-Christian ideologies, the real threat was adaptation, the loss of conviction, and the fear of displeasing. Faith was allowed to become lukewarm, lifeless, and ineffective. Now I understood why Jesus was sad when he showed me all this. He was not concerned about the physical destruction of the church. He suffered because his own house was turning away from him. Even so, I was aware that I could not force anyone to see what I had seen. Truth cannot be imposed, it must be discovered, and everyone has their own time to do so. Some will never believe, others will only understand when it is too late, but my mission was not to convince, but to witness, to make the truth accessible to those who were ready to hear it. I was no longer seeking approval, nor hoping for recognition. I was satisfied knowing that there were people ready to grasp and respond to Christ's call. But time was limited. This awareness has never left me since I returned. I don't know how much time the church has left to make its decisions. It could be years or decades, but I am certain that complacency is the worst choice. Our biggest mistake is thinking that everything will resolve itself, that faith will endure without effort, that truth will remain intact without conflict. What I saw in my vision was a church in decline, not because it was threatened from the outside, but because it chose to conform to the world instead of transforming it from within. If we do not act, if prayer ceases, if truth continues to be compromised in the name of acceptance, then the path I saw, where the temples were empty and faith became irrelevant, will come to pass. However, there is still time, an opportunity for change, and that change begins in every heart that chooses not to give up. I do not know how far my voice will reach, nor how many others will listen, or how many will mock, but that no longer matters. What I saw was real. What Jesus showed me was not an illusion, but a warning, an urgent appeal for those who still have ears to hear. For this reason, I will continue to speak, even if my voice gets lost in the noise of the world. I cannot force anyone to believe, nor can I convince those who cannot see what I have seen, but I can do my part. If even one person truly wakes up to God because of what I experienced, then my near-death experience will not have been in vain. After that experience, my prayer life changed radically. I used to pray out of duty. Now I do it because I understand that without prayer, the church cannot survive. It is not just a spiritual practice, but an urgent necessity. I could see, feel, almost touch the invisible reality that surrounded us. Every sincere prayer was a blow against the darkness, and every act of genuine faith reignited a small light in the world. Conversely, every compromise, every time someone chose the easier path instead of the truth, strengthened the shadows. The battle was not fought with swords or words, but through the daily choices between light and darkness. It was that simple, yet so profound. I understood that prayer was the only true weapon we had at our disposal, and that without it, we were vulnerable. Yet no matter how much darkness surrounded me, there was still hope. The church could be saved not through grand speeches, political reforms, or structural changes, but through the hearts that chose to remain faithful even when everything around seemed to be crumbling. Faith could not rest on fear or empty traditions, but on a genuine love for God, and that love was still alive. I saw it in the eyes of those who sought me, in those who cried as they listened to my story, because deep down they sensed that something was wrong without really knowing how to explain it. What Jesus showed me wasn't a warning, but a message. The decision lay in the hands of the faithful. The church could be reborn or fade into nothingness, and that choice, ultimately, was individual. Every person who kneels in prayer makes a difference. Each of us carries a part of the future of the church. As time passed, I realized that my message wouldn't resonate with everyone. Some preferred to believe that everything was fine, that the church had always faced crises, and that this was just another phase. Others dismissed any suggestion that something was amiss because accepting that reality would mean change, taking a stand. However, I also found people who understood, those who felt deep in their souls that faith was waning, that the church was in danger. For them, my words were not new. They were a confirmation of what God had already placed in their hearts, and it was for them that I continued to speak. It didn't matter how many ridiculed me or how many ignored me. I didn't need everyone to believe, but only those who still had an ear to hear and respond to Christ's call. Yet, time was running out. This feeling had never left me since I returned. I can't say how much time is left in this life, but I do know that I will use every day I have to dedicate myself to what Jesus has asked of me. I'm not special. I'm not holier or more worthy than anyone else. I am just a priest who died for a moment and returned with a weight in my heart, the weight of the truth that cannot be ignored. Others will listen to what I say, and there will be those who mock, but that no longer matters. What I witnessed was genuine. What Jesus revealed to me was not a dream or an illusion, but a warning, an urgent call for those who still have the capacity to listen. For this reason, I will continue to make my voice heard, even if it gets lost in the clamor of the world. I do not have the power to force anyone to believe, nor to compel anyone to see what I have seen. I can only do my part, and if even a single soul truly awakens in God because of what I experienced, then my near-death experience will have made sense. After that moment, my prayer life underwent a deep transformation. Once I prayed out of obligation, out of habit, following my duties as a priest. Now I pray because I am aware that without prayer, the church has no future. It is no longer just a matter of spiritual practice, but a crucial necessity. I feel almost as if I can touch that invisible reality surrounding us. Every genuine prayer is like a strike against the darkness. Every act of authentic faith rekindles a small flame in the world. In the same way, every concession, every time someone chooses the easier path over the truth, strengthens the shadows. The battle is not fought with swords or words, but with daily choices between light and dark. It's a truth so simple, yet so frightening. I have come to understand that prayer is the only real weapon we possess, and without it, we are vulnerable. Yet, despite the darkness I have seen, hope still exists. The church can save itself, not through grand speeches or structural policies, but through hearts that choose to remain loyal even when everything seems lost. Faith cannot withstand fear or empty traditions, but must arise from a genuine love for God. And that love is still present. I recognized it in the eyes of those who sought me, in those who cried while listening to my story, because deep down they knew something was wrong, but they could not put their finger on it. What Jesus showed me was not a game, but a warning. The decision is in the hands of those who believe. The church can either be reborn or fade into oblivion. And this choice ultimately is personal. Every individual who kneels in prayer helps make a difference. Each of us holds a fragment of the future of the church. Over time, I came to realize that my message wasn't for everyone. Some people chose to convince themselves that everything was fine, believing that the church had always weathered crises and that this was just another phase. Others, on the other hand, refused to acknowledge that anything was wrong, as doing so would mean they had to change and take a stand. Yet at the same time, I also found those who truly understood, people who felt deep in their souls that faith was losing strength, that the church was in danger. For these individuals, my words were not fresh news, but rather a confirmation of what God had already planted in their hearts, and it was for them that I continued to speak. It didn't matter how many mocked me or how many overlooked my message. I didn't need to convince everyone, just those who still had the ability to listen and felt the call of Christ. However, time is limited. This feeling has not left me since I returned. I can't say how much time we have left in this life, but I know I will use every day available to fulfill what Jesus has asked of me. I'm not special. I'm neither holier nor more deserving than others. I am simply a priest who died for a few moments and then returned, carrying a weight in my heart, the weight of the truth that cannot be ignored. There was something wrong, but I knew how to express what Jesus revealed to me. It was not an inevitable fate, but a warning. The choice remained in the hands of the faithful. The church could either be revived or fade into oblivion. Ultimately, that decision wasn't collective, but personal. Every person who kneels in prayer makes a difference. Each of us holds a fragment of the future of the church. As time went by, I realized that my message didn't resonate with everyone. Some chose to ignore reality, believing that everything was in order and that the church had simply faced other crises, viewing it as just another phase. Others, meanwhile, refused to admit that something was wrong, since acknowledging that would involve the need to change and take a stand. Nevertheless, I encountered those who understood, people who sensed, deep within their being, that faith was losing strength and that the church was in danger. For them, my words were not new. Rather, they confirmed a feeling already present in their hearts, and it was for them that I continued to speak. It didn't matter how much I was ridiculed or ignored. I didn't need to convince everyone. I only needed those who still had ears to listen and respond to the call of Christ. But time was running out. This feeling had never left me since I returned. I can't say how much time is left for the church in its decision. It could be years or decades, but I am sure that compromise is the worst option. The gravest mistake we can make is to think that things will work out on their own, that faith will thrive without effort, that truth can be preserved without conflict. What I saw in the vision was a church fading away, not because it was attacked from the outside, but because from the inside it chose to conform to the world rather than transform it. If nothing is done, if prayer ceases, if truth continues to be compromised in the name of acceptance, then the path I perceived, where temples would be empty and faith would become irrelevant, will become reality. They chose to maintain their faith even when the world around seemed to be collapsing. Faith could not be sustained by fear or by meaningless traditions, but by authentic love for God. And this love was still present. I recognized it in the eyes of those who sought me, in those who wept as they heard my testimony, because deep down they sensed that something was not right, but struggled to find the words to express it. What Jesus revealed to me was not a dream, but a warning. The responsibility remained in the hands of the faithful. The church had the opportunity to be reborn or to fade into oblivion, and this choice in the end was not collective, it was individual. Every person who kneels in prayer can make a difference. Each of us carries a part of the future of the church within us. Over time, I realized that my message was not meant for everyone. Some preferred to believe that everything was under control, that the church had always faced crises, and that this was just another step. Others, on the other hand, rejected any idea that there was something wrong, because acknowledging it would mean having to change, to take a stand. But at the same time, I also met people who understood. Those who felt deep in their souls that the faith was waning, that the church was in danger. For them, my words were not new, but rather a confirmation of what God had already instilled in their hearts, and it was for them that I continued to speak. It didn't matter how many mocked me or how many ignored me. I didn't need everyone to believe. I just needed those who still had ears to listen and respond to the call of Christ. But time was limited. This feeling accompanied me constantly since I returned. I couldn't say how much time we have left in this life, but I am certain that I will use every day I have to fulfill what Jesus has asked of me. I am not special. I am not holier or more worthy than anyone else. I am simply a priest who died for a few moments and returned with a weight in my heart, the weight of a truth that cannot be ignored. They chose to remain loyal, even when everything around them seemed to be collapsing. Faith could not be fueled by fear or empty traditions, but rather by a genuine love for God. And that love was still present. I saw it in the eyes of those who sought me out, in those who cried while listening to my story, because deep down they sensed that something was wrong, but they couldn't define what was revealed to me by Jesus. It was not an illusion, but a warning, an urgent call for those who still have ears to listen. The decision remained in the hands of the faithful. The church could be reborn or lost in oblivion, and that choice, ultimately, was individual. Every person who kneels in prayer contributes to the difference. Each of us carries a piece of the future of the church. Over time, I came to understand that my message was not meant for everyone. Some, in fact, preferred to remain convinced that everything was fine, that the church had always faced crises, and that this was just another phase. Others rejected any notion that something was dysfunctional, because accepting that truth would mean having to change and take a stand. However, I also found those who understood, people who felt deep within their essence that the faith was faltering, that the church was in danger. For them, my words were not new, but a confirmation of what God had already sown in their hearts. And it was for them that I continued to speak. It didn't matter how many mocked or ignored me. I didn't need everyone to believe. It was enough that those who still had ears listened and responded to the call of Christ. But time was limited. This feeling has never left me since I returned. I don't know how much time I have left in this life, but I know I will use every day I have to do what Jesus has asked of me. I'm not special, nor am I more holy or worthy than others. I'm just a priest who died for a brief period and returned with the burden of a truth that cannot be forgotten. I no longer worry about titles or positions within the church, nor about the acceptance of those who prefer silence. What matters to me now is the mission. As long as I am alive, I will continue to sound the alarm. I will continue to call people to return to the true faith. I know many will continue to harbor doubts. I know some will call me a fanatic or an alarmist, anchored in the past. But I have seen what awaits us. I have witnessed the effects when prayer fades, when the faith weakens, and when pastors abandon their flock. And as long as there is even one faithful soul willing to listen, I won't stop, because, in the end, the church will not be saved by talks, reforms, or attempts to adapt to the world, but by the faithful who, faced with the choice between Christ and darkness, will choose to remain in the light. That decision will not be made by institutions, but by individual souls. Each must make their own choice, and that choice must happen now. I know well what it means when truth is abandoned, when prayer is forgotten. However, I also know that the light can still prevail if there are those who defend it. Therefore, the crucial question is, which side are you on? If this story has made you reflect, the question I pose to you is, do you believe that faith can still contribute to saving the church, or is it already too late? I want to hear your opinion, so leave a comment below. And if you've already experienced a significant spiritual moment, share it. Your story could inspire others. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you won't miss transformative content like this. I now invite you to watch the next video that appears on the screen, where we will discuss another experience that could reshape your view of life and spirituality. See you there, stay with God, and see you soon.